The 6 seconds of silence.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, it's 8. Oh, almost 9. Hello and welcome back to the B2B Power Hour. Morgan, it's so nice to see you back.
I'm back, everybody. Thanks to everyone who showed up the last week plus, I think, with shows with Nick. Today, I get the privilege to be back for a banger.
It was interesting when we started talking about this show and what we were seeing. And the 3 most common questions that we get asked in DMs is, I don't know who to talk to, I don't know what to say, and I don't know when to reach out. And so it really catapulted us on this journey of why is this so problematic? What happened? Because when we started out in sales, someone taught us how to do account research. Someone taught us how to find that information, taught us how to route into accounts. And of course, there was always a talk that channels are dead.
Of course. Always.
But what happened that made this such a big deal? And so I was trying to think, to have this conversation, who would be the best people to bring on? And it's always interesting when you talk to friends that go on a lot of podcasts and they say, there's this one person, just one person that is the most unbelievable host that asks the best questions, that gets the root to all the problems and makes you sound incredible. And that's the one and only Jen Allen. And then with Jen Allen, we're like, who can we put on par with Jen Allen to have this conversation that's also really prepared? And I was thinking, who do I know that gets this better than most? And I was thinking of the person that helped me really understand how to frame a problem I was trying to think of who would help me frame a problem so it's really understood. And you're not just throwing out a solution. You're really building that understanding and making it really compelling so that they really want to talk to you. And the first person that ever really helped me understand that was the one and only Josh Braun. So let's bring them on.
Let's bring them on. Yay! Welcome to the show, guys.
So great to be here.
I got to say, if anybody has an opportunity to get introduced on a LinkedIn Live, you should take it because it feels really good, to have. So if you can do that, do that. It's a great opportunity to do that.
We're happy to provide here at the B2B Power Hour.
Thanks for having me on.
It is true, Nick. The thing I think we continue to hear from sellers is, well, we hear this from buyers as well, is like how do I break into the account? How do I actually get the meeting? How, every third week there's a post on LinkedIn that's like cold calling's dead or cold emailing's dead or social's dead. I mean, choose your favorite channel. Of course, it's all dead. And it seems, at least, that it has very little to do with the channel, and it has a lot more to do with the prep work. And so I'm so thrilled today for this conversation.
I think I have a question to start us off, guys.
Yeah.
Is any channel really dead, or do we just not have a compelling reason to call? What do you guys think?
I mean, I would argue MySpace might be dead. I'll go with that. That's the one channel. But aside from that, I think it's just an attempt to be provocative, right? Like, no matter what the channel is that we're using, in my opinion, it matters far more about the content of what we are saying versus the channel through which we say it. Like, I personally will own up to the fact that I'm not someone who feels very comfortable with cold calling. So I've worked my entire career to find out how to maximize other channels because of my deficiency in cold calling. But I would never sit here and say cold calling is dead just because I don't think I'm that good at it.
That's fair.
Yeah, I would say so. If the prospect doesn't have a phone, then the phone channel is probably not good for that prospect because they don't have a phone. Right. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, I want to second what Jen said. Movies can be amazing, but they could also suck. Books can be amazing. They could also suck. Video can be amazing. It could also suck. So it's never really the medium. It's the person in the center of that medium, which is the actual prospect. And as I was listening to the intro of this live, it was interesting about how it started, which is, I want to know who to target. I want to know what to say. I want to know who to book the meeting. What I hope we're going to talk about today is a little bit less I, and to start with the actual person in the center of getting those communications, which is the prospect. That's the thing that's never going to change. the sort of mediums, video, holograms, whatever the next thing is always going to change. And so you kind of pick the one where the prospect is, and then you start to get a little bit better at that channel.
Where do you like to start then, Josh, when you're looking into, let's say, I mean, we can do any sized accounts. I don't really have a preference for today's conversation, but like when you're looking at getting in front of a prospect, what are the first three things that you focus on?
So I first focus on the terrible, no good, very bad thing that happens to a prospect if they don't hear from me. This is not a value proposition. No matter what you sell, your prospect is getting the job done today without you. So I'll give you just a quick example of what I'm talking about here. I don't know, several years ago, I was in the mall with my wife. I didn't need anything. She was doing some shopping and we were going to grab some dinner afterwards. And just to kill some time, I walked into a Fit to Run store, not needing anything. And if the sales associate said to me, "What brings you in today?" I would have said nothing. If she said, "We got these great sneakers that just came out from Brooks. They've got these new soles. They help you run faster," I would have said, "I'm good. I got sneakers." But the sales associate didn't do those things. She looked down at my sneakers and she said, "Are you a runner?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "What distance?" And I said, "Well, I'm training for my first half marathon." And then she said, "Have you ever had a gait test?" And I said, "What is that?" And moments later, I'm literally on the treadmill in the store. She's videotaping me. She freezes the frame. She zooms into my ankles. And she said, "Notice how your ankles are overpronating when you run." And I said, "So what?" She goes, "The problem is if you run in sneakers that are not made for pronated feet, you can get injured on long distance runs. You can get plantar fasciitis. You can get runner's knee. And you can get sidelined." And as an old Jewish man, that got my attention because we don't like to get hurt or injured on anything. And then she said, "If you'd like, I could check your sneakers to see if they're made for pronated feet. If you'd like, I could take a look at your sneakers." I said, "Sure." And they weren't. And about 6 minutes later, I'm spending $180 on new sneakers and insoles. The moral of the story is your prospects, no matter what you sell, have sneakers today. So we have to start with what terrible, no good, very bad thing happens if they're running in sneakers. And it's got to be a no good, very bad, terrible thing. Because if I'm only running once a year, 3 miles, I don't really care about a gait test. So problems alone aren't enough to get someone's attention. They got to be intense or they got to be frequent. Most of the time when I do this exercise with salespeople, and I say, "Tell me the before story," I call it the infomercial story. Like, what's your version of that? They struggle with it. They kind of go to, "Well, we sell sneakers and they help you run faster." And no one really cares because everyone's got sneakers that are good enough. So we got to start there.
Jen, it kind of reminds me of some Challenger insights in a different way, of course, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons I'm such a fangirl for Josh, and he knows this, but so I don't feel weird saying it, is because I think the way that he tells stories really illuminates what we are trying to convey in Challenger in such a more powerful way than I think traditionally we've done it, right? So when Josh talks about that sneaker story, one of the things I recall when I was first learning how to sell is I would look at an opportunity territory and I would look at what we did and I would say, well, everybody can benefit from more sales training, right? Like, so I had this tendency to look at these big, sexy opportunities. I would go through opportunity by opportunity and say, well, they have a large sales force and they're a great brand. I'd be super excited to bring on. And I would convince myself that anyone could benefit from this. And that was the conversation I was delivering to my prospects. And the reality is, sure, people could benefit from it. But to Josh's point around running, 3 miles a year, it's the same thing. Like, so now when I'm looking at an opportunity, I try to put that aside. And instead of thinking, why might someone benefit or like our solution? Why might they not? What are all the compelling reasons why staying the same, to Josh's point, is okay? And if I can win that battle in my own head, like play it out, then I feel confident picking up the phone or sending an email because I have evidence. I'm looking for evidence to support that the problem is perhaps bigger than they have. But I think I used to make that mistake a lot. And there, as a result, were accounts that I chased for years that I probably should have never even been spending time on.
Yeah, and I think related to that too is, look, everybody wants to be happier, right? So I want to be happier as a runner. I don't want to get injured, but happiness is relative. What makes a marathon runner happier is different than what makes an old Jewish guy running a 5K happier, right? So if I'm selling the same thing to a CEO, let's say I'm selling a printer, a copy machine. If I'm selling it to a CFO, the CFO is going to care about cost per page. But the person in the marketing department is going to care more about speed and color. So we have to also keep in mind that everyone's a little bit different. And so what I see a lot is these lists that people make, and they got CEOs, CFOs, marketing directors, and they all are saying the sort of same talk track, which we'll get into a little bit later on. But that's the second piece of this, is having that hypothesis, finding those accounts where people are running lots of races, and then figuring out, well, are there different people that are running races that might care about different things? Maybe someone's been doing it for a long time versus someone that's just been starting out. Those are going to be a little bit different talk tracks. Almost like different swim lanes for each of those. One list of these people, one list of these people.
That's kind of how you build lists, though, Nick, right? Like, I was thinking through some of your prep work. Yeah.
But we see that all the time when we start working with a client. I'll ask them, so why are they on the list? Well, they're in the right industry vertical and they're the right size. Okay, you did step 1. What about step 2? How do you build that sandbox around them of they're the best fit for your deal? They're the best fit for your implementation, that they're going to see the real value in a meaningful time, that you're not going to have to change up your entire organization to fulfill that order. And I feel like that's where we miss a step, and then we just automatically start dialing, and we just pick, instead of, like Josh was talking about earlier, like show up on the channel that they will respond to, but we automatically just jump on the phone and start dialing, and we have the same pitch for every single person because we never thought about how we needed to show up in order to go and meet that conversation where they're at.
In terms of like one sort of thing of resistance we hear, I would say more among early career sellers than more experienced ones, are like, oh, sounds like it takes a lot of time to prepare, right? And I feel like some of this is more pernicious when they are selling something smaller deal size, maybe into SMB instead of selling into enterprise, because the quota is set up for them to sort of do volume-based outreach anymore. What are some guidelines that individual sellers should be looking at for how much time they're investing into this prep work, not only finding the swim lanes and understanding the big problem to solve, but kind of creating those lists before they actually run their outreach? Do you have any guidelines on that?
Slow down, everybody. So everything doesn't have to be scaled. Everything doesn't have to be done really fast. The thing is, if you rush through the list creation process, if you're not real slow about that, and you're addicted to speed because you want to start sending out emails and making calls, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have lots of conversations with the wrong people. Having conversations over the phone is the easy part now. There's technology and services out there that allow you to make 50 dials and have 12 conversations consistently. We could talk about the 3 ways to do that, but it is no longer a challenge to have conversations. So if you have people that will pick up the phone, and you have your hypothesis, and you have a talk track that is not pitching anything, we can get into that a little bit later on, but just allows people to sort of feel comfortable opening up, you can get good really fast. Because again, you can have 12 conversations every 50 dials. Back when I was selling younger, it would take longer to get better. So it doesn't take long to whip up a hypothesis and to slow down and spend the time necessary to create a list. I'm not talking about a week, I'm talking about maybe 4 or 5 days just to make up a good list of about 200 people. LinkedIn with Sales Navigator doesn't take that long. And then use a service like Phone Ready Leads to ensure that you're only calling people that are most likely to pick up the phone. That's not a long-term contract. That can be done in 2 days. And then you can actually every day have 12 conversations. And if you break your cold call up into 4 parts, which we'll talk about, you can actually measure how interesting you are. Are you losing people at part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4? And you can start to hone in your message to see, wow, this is really resonating, but I'm losing people over here, or this is really clicking. And you can do this really, really quickly within like a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say to Josh's point, you can save time early on by taking these like spray and pray tactics, but you always pay the price later. Like we can't remove time from the equation. It's just, where do you want to waste it? So for me personally, I think I think there is a slight nuance if you're selling a large enterprise deal versus if you're selling a really transactional product. Like, I will acknowledge that, I do hear it, but in both circumstances, both of those require an immense, deep understanding of the problem that customer may not really fully appreciate about how they're running their business, an appreciation of all the alternative ways they've convinced themselves that they're currently attacking it, and very, very deep understanding of how to recognize those things. So, for example, in selling what I sell, right, it used to be like, we can only do this kind of preparation if it's an enterprise public company. Now we are living in this era where like people like us are on podcasts like this talking about their company's growth strategy. And so I can go out and hunt and just Google things like CEO Plus podcast, and I can start to listen for what is the wisdom of that customer. They are trying to get to this end state. They're talking about these 3 things that they're doing to get there. Where can I recognize a flaw in that wisdom? And then where that would put them, for me, into like my primary top-notch territory. And then there might be a middle camp where I'm like, I kind of think there's something there, but I don't have evidence to support it. That would be my B camp. And then my C camp, or I'm not even going to waste time on it, is I have no reason to believe that they are pursuing something and they're pursuing it with this conventional wisdom that would necessitate them to change anything. And I think we have to just be honest with ourselves that not everybody is going to be a customer, and like double down on the ones that we have evidence to support that could. So that's certainly how I think about it. I totally relate to what Josh said. Yeah, you're not selling tacos. I don't know who put that in the chat. I feel like Crunchwrap Supremes is not
Oh, that's great. I think that's Dr. Jim in the chat. One thing, Nick, I didn't mean to cut you off if you had a question. Okay. So when I think about the dirty little secret around here is I'm not a seller. I'm a marketer by trade. I just happen to show up on the show every week. A lot of times in the marketing world, messaging is sort of developed in a vacuum, unfortunately. And there's some real-time testing and like some, using marketing campaigns to sort of measure the effectiveness of that. But the way that sellers do this is really different than marketers in the way both of you have talked about this already. So Josh, you've already sort of indicated there's like a balance or some sort of seesaw between having the framework that you're using ready before you're going out and actually talking with people, but then you're sort of refining and testing that messaging in market with prospects. So first of all, how do you like navigate that balance? And then secondly, like what are you listening for? What are you paying attention to as you're conducting those conversations?
This is very simple. Okay, so we'll go very, very simple. So I'm looking for the black and white version of the infomercial. If you've ever seen an infomercial, you see someone in the kitchen that loves making tomato caprese salad. And he's got this knife in the kitchen. And he loves making this 4 to 5 times a week for his family because he's an Italian guy. And you see him kind of slicing these tomatoes, but the thing is the knife that he has is a little dull. And as he's slicing the tomatoes, it gets the job done, but man, the tomatoes sort of splats, it's messy. The tomatoes don't like come out perfectly. It gets a little stain on his apron. And one day he decides to go to the mall, look for a new knife. He gets there and there's like so many different knives, tons of different Japanese steel. They start at like $500, they go to $700. He's like, you know what? I have limited resources. It's a problem. It's not that big of a problem. I'm just going to go home and just live with my wife, my knife, and just live with everything and just be done with it. And then one day he gets this outreach and he sees this amazing thing called a Ginsu knife. And it slices through cans. It doesn't have to be sharpened for 10 years. And it's like $75 for $125 you get 2, and he gets it right away. So I'm looking for the black and white version of the infomercial. Where do you find that? So simple. So I'm working with a company now called Snowflake. I go onto the Snowflake's website. I go to their testimonial videos. I go to their case studies. There was a webinar some customer was doing from EA, which is a gaming company, and he was talking about all the terrible things that it took to get the job done before they switched to Snowflake. He would say things like this, BI analysts would spend about 2 hours analyzing data and waiting for the spinning wheel to crunch the numbers before they could start doing the analysis. And it made them very debilitating and it made them very frustrated because the analyst that starts doing that job isn't the same one after it. They just want to analyze the numbers. They don't want to wait for stuff. So I'm taking this language and I'm putting it into a doc called the Lingo Library. Literally quotes from the customers, literally things that they're saying, not marketing, because marketing doesn't sound exactly like a customer sometimes. I'm looking for things in quotes. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take those quotes, that language, and we'll talk about this, and I'm just going to plug it into my cold call framework. So I'm actually using the voice of the customer's before story, and I'm just plugging it in there. And we'll talk about what this sounds like in a second. But the idea here is, where can you find the before? And again, in quotes, speaking to the problems or the terrible things or the cumbersome way things used to get done before they switch knives. Doesn't have to be complicated, but a lot of websites have this in their case studies or testimonial videos. If you don't have that, you have to do something called the jobs to be done interview, which we can get into if you want, but that's the only technique that I know that gets you to the causal reasons of why someone switched. You can't ask people why they switched. They won't be able to tell you, but this technique called jobs to be done is a great technique I used over at Basecamp that actually gets the words out of the customer's mouth again, that speaks to the events and circumstances that eventually caused them to not be able to take it anymore and switch. And I'm listening for energy, what I call oomph. When I listen to these testimonial videos, I'm listening for words like, it sucked. It was a real pain. It was debilitating for them. They were super frustrated. Those are the words like that have energy or oomph, and I'm gonna take those and I'm just gonna plug those right into the talk track.
What I love about this, right, is you sit here and we nod our head and we're like, yeah, of course. But then you listen to sales pitches, you read emails, you go to websites, and we're talking about the after story. It is so often like, here's the ROI because they did this. We rarely, at least I rarely see content that really illuminates what Josh is talking about, which is the cost of doing nothing, the cost of staying the same. There is a cost to it. And we as humans, we want to turn our eye to it. It's the same reason for 6 months I didn't go to the gym. I was like, I'm not dead. I'm fine. Like, I'm just going to keep not going. But if I had gone to the doctor and they said, Jen, you're going to have a heart attack, I would go. And it is the single greatest thing. It's the reason I love Josh's content so much, is because oftentimes we don't recognize this human behavior until we are confronted with stories that we live and breathe in our personal lives. So if there's one thing of anything that people take away from this, it's like the before story is the power, because that's what draws people in. Customers see solutions and they see dollar signs, especially right now. People, we love to talk about our problems though. Therapy is a whole business because of it. It's a really, really significant point that I think many of us, including myself, didn't learn early enough in my sales career.
I think Jen makes a great point. Like, my wife and I are on vacation right now in Amsterdam, and we're sort of eating our way through this country. And we've noticed that we're gaining like a little weight, which we're not used to because we're usually pretty active. So it's a little bit of a problem, but we're still able to fit into our jeans as of today. The second we're not able to buckle those jeans up anymore, that's going to be when we'll probably stop eating the apple pie. That's not tonight, but that's kind of what Jen's point is. It's like you start to sort of feel it a little bit. And you're like, you feel that pinch a little bit of like, oh, he's getting a little tight. And then if you know what to say to someone, you're going to sort of open up the conversation, which again, we can get into the talk tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I love that because it's that why change, why now? And once we know that, that's a great conversation. But you listen to a lot of sellers, it's why you or why me? They go right for the company and they start right in the solution. And you're hoping that they understand the problem well. And so you're trying to jumpstart in that system. They're like, but I don't have a problem. But I wonder if we should go and talk a little bit, Josh, how when you take that insight, how do you turn that into list building? And then we'll talk about how to turn it into messaging. Because this is the one thing we see a lot is it doesn't get translated into better segmented lists. Everybody just tries to fight on the phone to try to get this message across instead of starting with a little bit of pre-qualification just to have a better list from the start.
Yeah, so Dean, we're going to get to your question in terms of the talk track and the messaging. But so for Snowflake, they sell to lots of different types of people. So that person from EA that spoke about the problems, and we'll show how that translates into a script in a second. We're going to now go find other people in the gaming industry with that person's title. And that's going to be a list. Because what we're going to assume, or have a hypothesis, I shouldn't say assume, we're going to have a hypothesis that people like him might be having that same issue. So simply look at that person's title and just now build a list up of other people in gaming with that title. We're going to take the words that he or she said that speak to the before story. We're going to massage them a little bit to put them into this framework, which we're going to talk about. And then we're just not going to assume that the person has any kind of problem. We're not going to pitch anything. We're going to have a mindset of leaning back and asking a question in a very specific way to see if the prospect decides they want to lean forward versus us pitching anything on them, because your solution has no value unless the prospect starts to light up about the problem. And if you do this really well, if you say this as they're saying it, you sort of join the conversation in their head, you create this tension, and the prospect starts to say, well, what do you have? What do you mean? And now they're leaning forward, and now you can start to talk a little bit about how you can potentially help. But it's a very reverse of how most people do it, which is the reason for my call is, that's going to tip people off that a pitch is about to come. That's the tip off that the fastball is coming. So we'll talk about this when we get into messaging, but to answer your question, you find the person's quote and you just build up a list of people like them, and you just start there. Like, you just start small. Don't design the whole website, just the homepage. Just start real small. And then you can add another swim lane.
Yes, I hear it, Nick. Okay, whatever. We'll just start with the homepage. Sorry, he's giving me grief. Yeah. All right. It sounds like we shouldn't delay the messaging too far because we tease this so much. So how about let's just dive into developing that talk track and maybe some of the cold call frameworks, Josh?
Yeah, sure. So let's give you some real examples. And I'll do like 3 or 4 so we can kind of burn this in. So assuming that we have a good list and assuming we have a good hypothesis, now we have to know what to say, because we've established already that getting conversations is no longer an issue. There's 3 different ways to do that. We can get into it later, but just know that there's ways you can have 15, 17 conversations for every 50 dials using parallel assisted dialers, services like Ryan Reiser, or virtual dial assistants like a Connect and Sell. So there's that problem's solved. Prospect picks up the phone. Let me tell you the first thing that I do and the psychology behind it so you can make it your own. There was a very famous restaurant in Chicago way before all these reservation apps, upscale restaurant, and they had a huge problem. Problem was people would make a reservation and they just wouldn't show up. And this restaurant was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year until the owner came up with this great idea. He told the person that was making the reservation to modify her script a little bit when she was taking the reservation. He said, what I want you to do when you take the reservation is simply ask people if they'll let you know if they have to cancel. So when the person made the reservation, she said, it looks like your reservation's for 6:30. Hey, if for any reason you can't make it, will you please let us know? And people would say, sure. And because people said that, they were more inclined to actually do what they said, because people are hardwired for their actions to stay consistent with their words. If I said, Jen, I'll help you, move, and I didn't show up, I'm going to feel incongruent with my actions. So people want to stay in homeostasis. So what we're going to do when we make a cold call is we're simply going to extend a little mini invitation to see if they're open to talking with us. So at least we can get to part 2 of the cold call. So it's 4 parts, and we're just going to see if we can get to part 2. And that might sound like this. Hey, Jen, my name is Josh. We've never spoken before, but I was just taking a quick spin through your LinkedIn. I was hoping you could help me out for a moment. Or it could sound like this. Hey, Jen, my name is Josh. We've never spoken before, but I was on your LinkedIn and was hoping I could ask you a couple questions. Do you got a sec? In a sort of casual, matter-of-fact tone. Or you could say something like this. Hey, Jen, you're probably going to hate me because this is a cold call. You want to hang up right now or roll the dice? Any one of those openers in a calm way, whichever one suits your soul, about 85 to 90% of the time, you're going to get someone that says, sure, what's this about? How can I help you? And now we're on part 2. The key isn't so much the words. It's more about the tonality and this relaxed tone and setting your intent that your intent isn't to get a meeting. Your intent is to see if you can create an environment where prospects feel comfortable telling you the truth, which is perhaps they have this problem or not, and it's okay either way. Because to Jen's point, you're for some people, but you're not for everyone. Where we get into trouble is where we think our intent is to book a meeting. And then we say things and sound in ways that feel hypey. Hey, Jen, this is Josh. We've never spoken before, but I was on your LinkedIn. Can you help me out for a moment? Right? So same words, but different intent. Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can feel it in the energy right from the start. And it's when you drop that tone too, it's that curiosity of like, oh, Josh did some research on my profile. I wonder what question it already starts that curiosity. You're like, yes, please keep going. You're excited.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got a great call from this woman, Kendra Warlaw, 6 or 7 months ago. She called me and says, "Hey, Josh, my name is Kendra. I'm calling you from the drive-through at Starbucks. Do you got a sec?"
Ooh, I
I was
like
like,
that.
"Yeah, what are you drinking? Macchiato?"
Yeah.
You know, so again, it's your personality, but the idea is to sort of ask for permission to continue. And hey, Josh, we've never met, but I'm familiar with you because I work with several people in the Boca Tri group and came across your name. Do you got a second? I promise to be brief. Sure. How can I? So any one of those, a little content. So any one of those will work. And, about 85, 90% of the time, someone will say, sure, how can I help you? Especially if you do it in a sort of matter of fact, low key tone where you don't have the intent to get anything. You don't have the intent to pitch anything. You're sort of waving a metal detector around, seeing if it beeps. And when your intent is to just get to truth, not as a mechanism to get what you want and to let go of assumptions and to let go of expectations and to let go of having an agenda, not as a mechanism to get a meeting, but just as a sales philosophy, prospects can feel that energy.
So good.
No, I mean, just to drive this home, when your intent is to book a meeting and a prospect says, "I can't talk right now, I'm on my way to the hospital." If your intent is to book a meeting, what the reps do is, sorry to hear that. Can I steal 37 seconds to tell you why I called? This happens. If your intent isn't to book a meeting, you say, "Oh my gosh, is everything okay?" If your intent is to book a meeting and the prospect says, "I'm at the gym," and your intent is to book a meeting, you say, "Can I have 37 seconds to tell you why I called?" If your intent isn't to book a meeting, you say, "Backer buys." Right? So it's a different, but you can't get that if your intent is to book a meeting. You're always looking for 37 seconds. Like I heard a great cold call. This guy, Justin's really good on the phone. This was 4 months ago. The guy says, "Hey, I can't talk right now. I'm on a boat." And Justin, in a very calm voice, said, "How do you get to be on a boat Tuesday at 2:00 in the afternoon? I want to be on a boat." And the guy's like, "Oh, you got to be older." And Justin goes, "I'm old." And the guy goes, "How old?" And he goes, "I'm 38." He goes, "You got to be older than that." And it was an 8-minute call. It was an 8-minute call, right? So that's part one, and we can get to part two if you want. But I didn't want to monopolize.
No.
Jen, did you want to add anything, or you want to go and jump into the next round?
No, I think just as that role play plays out, right? Like one of the things I also like about what Josh does, he didn't waste up a bunch of real estate talking about where he's from and who he is. It's just he gets to the point, right? Which is something we do in we do it in our personal lives. We overcomplicate it often in conversations and sales. So sitting there thinking about being the recipient of that call, I for sure would have said, "Yeah, sure, what's up?" Even if I was probably like not expecting the call.
Yeah, and so part two is, even though we've done some research and we have our list, we have to actually validate that the person we're calling is actually doing the job that we think they're doing. So that might sound like this. "Hey, Jen, just to make sure I'm in the right place, are you still the one responsible for booking guests on your podcast? Or am I in the wrong place here?" "Hey, John, just to make sure I'm in the right place, do you still oversee the data team over there at Acme?" In a sort of casual way. "Yeah, that's me. I'm overseeing them." Or, "No, I retired." Don't we want to know they retired before we actually go any further? And again, this happens all the time. Sometimes people skip this step and they go to part three, which we'll get to, and the guy or the woman says, I don't even work there anymore. I don't even do that anymore." So I got to find out if I'm talking to the right person. "Hey, Josh, are you still training? You got any races coming up?" If I'm a triathlon coach and the person doesn't have any races coming up, the call's kind of over. Or you could say, "Do you know anyone that's having some races coming up?" So, "Hey, Josh, you got any races coming up this season, or are you sitting the season out if you're a triathlon coach?" "I'm doing some races." And now we can go to part three. So part one is we're going to extend a little mini invitation, see if we can get some people to sort of opt in to part two. And in part two, we're going to see if we're in the right place. Yeah.
Feel free. Part 3, 4, go for it.
Yeah.
Let's just knock it out.
Please.
This is great.
So part three is the most interesting part. So I call this, we don't want to pitch part. We want to ask a question that gets the prospect to think differently about how they're getting the job done today, so that they lean forward and are asking us questions. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So example number one I'll give you is for a company that solves this problem. You guys might not know this, but most sales organizations that are sending cold emails through tools like Outreach and SalesLoft, about 51, 52% of those emails never actually reach the inbox, they go to spam. This company fixes that problem. They get about 85 to 90% of those emails in inboxes. So the hypothesis we have is people don't know that. So the call might sound like this. I'm calling someone in sales ops. Hey, Nick, this is Josh. We've never spoken before, but I was on your LinkedIn. I was hoping I could ask you a couple quick questions. You got a sec? Sure. Hey, you still oversee sales ops over there? I do. Nick, I'm not sure if you're seeing this, but we've analyzed a couple million emails over here at Warmbox, and we're seeing that 51% of them land in spam. How are you ensuring the emails that your SDRs send don't end up in spam today? And then I'm going to do the hardest thing in the world, which is to just not say anything. I'm just going to not say anything. I'm just going to sort of lean back. And what you hear when you do this really well is some version of, I don't know, we're not doing much, or what's this about, or whatever the thing is. They're sort of open. Or what I mean specifically is inside sales organizations that are sending emails that are not getting delivered. And I was wondering how you're currently solving for that today. Now they might say, we're not sending any cold emails. To which case, to this case, fantastic, not a fit. We get all of our emails inbound, all of our leads come in. We don't even have an outbound team. Now, this is where salespeople go wrong. I did this exercise on LinkedIn 3 months ago. I did a scenario. I said, imagine you're selling meat delivered to the home, grass-fed beef. You make a cold call, and the prospect says this to you. I've been a vegan for 30 years. I don't believe in killing animals. Therefore, I'm not interested. 95% of salespeople thought that was an objection to overcome. They said things like this, well, you haven't tried our beef yet. Would you be open to learning about it? What do you mean? How long have you been a vegan? Some version of trying to overcome the objection. If your intent is to just get to the truth, which is maybe I'm talking to a vegan, and maybe I should just call meat eaters. Maybe I should call people that have an outbound team. Despite my research, I got this one wrong. I'm just going to say, sounds like I'm in the wrong place here. Doesn't seem like we're a fit. And I'm going to bail out of the call. If the person doesn't have a problem, that's okay. I'm going to call someone else. This is something you don't have to force. You're going to see people leaning forward, and they're going to be interested. I didn't know that. What do you guys do to solve that? Then we can kind of go to the next step, which is to sort of peel the onion back. Tell me a little about your team, and sounds like, well, we're doing that. It's, we have a solution in place. Sounds like it's checking every box. Sounds like it's perfect. Sounds like you're not looking to do anything right now. We could talk a little bit about how to handle objections, but this idea of asking a question that gets prospects to think differently. In the case of the snowflake example, hey, I don't know if you're seeing this over there, Pete, but we often hear that data analysts, they love conducting exploratory analysis, but they hate writing needed queries and then waiting 2 hours as the spinning pinwheel of death, as we call it, spins. How are you guys doing exploratory analysis over there today? That's for Snowflake.
The thing that I can't escape this feeling right now, which is like all of this, strictly speaking, are tactics, and it comes from this like strategy of actually your targeting, your list building, your initial hypothesis, because that informs all of this messaging. How all the framework, all the tonality, all the intention behind it is crucial, but it's kind of sits in a vacuum unless if you've built your list correctly. And I didn't want to lose this thread. I believe Jesus had asked this a while back, which is something we hear often of. Don't you think it's a lot of time wasted by SDRs building the lists themselves?
I do, because anytime you can get someone to build a list that's less expensive than an SDR, we want SDRs on the phone or writing emails. So if I can get that list creation process done without the SDRs for a lesser rate, I would do that. So I'd use a VA for that all day, a virtual assistant overseas. I would write out, so I have this in my guide, but you can write out videos and instructions and do Boolean searches and be able to replicate it and show this is how I want it done, and then just give that to someone for $5 or $6 an hour, let them build a list, and you give it to Ryan, let him validate all that stuff, make sure people pick up the phone, make sure the emails are valid, and then you give your SDRs the list so they can spend their time on the phone or writing emails. So anytime you can get a job done for less money, you shouldn't have people doing it that cost more money.
Jen, what do you think?
So the only thing I would say is I would want the SDR to understand why the people are on that list, right? So like totally agree. If you can outsource something, fabulous. But one of the skills I rarely organizations teaching to early career sellers and SDRs is understanding the why this is an A target, B target, C target, or however you tier it. And I think in more cases than I would love to see, it is left to the SDR to decide, what do you want to go after? And so we all come into this role flying blind, and we think like, okay, I recognize that name, or we have another customer that looks like that, so I'll put these people on the list. So regardless of how you do it, making sure that the SDR roles understand the why behind why the people are on the list is so incredibly important, and making it so that they could do it on their own if they had to. Now, but I agree with Josh. Like, you can outsource it, let them spend their time actually making the dials and sending the emails. But I don't see enough SDRs who truly understand the why behind their calling. And as a result, they default to what they know, which is my product, and here's why it's great, and here's why you should try it out.
Yeah, the biggest gap that I see, I concur with Jen, is not product training, it's problem training. No one has, so I work with sales teams all the time, and I always say, let's not talk about the problem. Can we actually show the SDRs how data analysts at Snowflake were getting the job done before they were using Snowflake? Not a deck, not words, not persona stuff, but actually a video. So I can see and feel the black and white version of the infomercial. That's the piece that's missing. And then you don't confident when you pick up the phone. You're sort of barking words, but you don't really know. You're calling like this data analyst, but you're kind of not sure. So I agree with Jen, like this idea of really feeling the problem is key. Spend some time on that.
Oh, think of the tradespeople that go from working tools to selling. And then when you sell, like it's an actual buying experience working with them because they know what's actually going on. There's the first thing that jumped in my brain. No wonder they're so successful. They get it. They felt it. They can talk about the emotion and the logic, and they can also walk you through it so you don't make the mistakes that they learned the hard way.
That is such a valid point. Like, I have the luxury of selling to salespeople. I was on a call this morning with a team that sells to CIOs and CISOs. If you do not do the job to which you sell to, like me, where I get the benefit of being like, yeah, it sucks when you lose to no decision, and I can story tell my own, we have to, and I think, Josh, this goes to your earlier point, we have to be able to tell the story that our customers are telling in a way that shows we have credibility because we understand the pain. Like, credibility by saying we work with this company and this company is such an overused motion. Like, where I feel credibility in opening up to someone is when I can be like, wow, they are surprisingly on the money in terms of my problem, not because you work with Microsoft or Google or whatever name in your list.
Yeah, I mean, I had to a similar point with that sort of getting to know your customer. I'm in Amsterdam. There's this shop up the street. This guy, Jose, owns a leather shop. He makes leather. Bags, laptop bags, handcrafted, beautiful stuff. I walk in there, and he sees me looking at a laptop bag. And every single time I've ever bought a laptop bag before, and I bought a lot of laptop bags and backpacks, the salesperson is always, let me show you all the features. All the pockets, the USB ports, how it's made. It's the same thing. This guy who owns the store, just him in the store, he walks up to me and he goes, why don't you try it on? And I go, what do you mean? He goes, wait till you see how this thing feels on you. He puts it on me and then he goes, I'm going to tug it down. You can see what it's like without a little weight on it. He goes, feel how that sounds on your shoulders, how that feels? That's this handcrafted leather that I stitch individual. I'm like, this guy's showing me how it feels. I've spent like $2,000 in that store. I got 3 laptop bags. I mean, it's just, it's because he knows the customer. And he said, I go, how did you get so good at this? He goes, well, I'm really good about who I spend my time with in the shop. I go, how do you know I was a target? He goes, well, there's 2 types of people that walk into the store. One is they look at the price tag immediately. Those are not my buyers. They never buy. But you didn't do that. You were kind of like looking at the zipper. You were kind of looking at the leather. He goes, you're my guy. So I walk up to you and I tell you to try it on. I'm like, so this is an example of Jen's point. Like, this guy knows his audience. The disadvantage salespeople have is they probably have never been a data analyst. They've probably never been a CFO. So you've got to get closer. So work with people in your company that are doing the job and really get to feel what it's like to do the job before they had your solution.
I was actually going to ask something in that direction because I don't know if it's like a systemic failure, but it happens often enough that my eyebrows always go up when we see a sales organization that has sellers that don't know much about their customers. They know a lot about back to your problem versus product training. So inside a sales organization, not just for the individual seller, I'm thinking more of the managers, the leadership, the overall org. How can that org properly equip their sellers with customer insight, problem knowledge, all of the stuff that we've talked about in a meaningful way, and not just here's a one-off thing here. Oh, every 3 months we do one thing here. What do you have any advice for sales leaders who are trying to solve this?
Bring the customer in and let the customer show, not tell, the SDRs how they were getting the job done before they switched and why it sucked. Or have somebody in the company that's doing the same job show. Or third would be listening to those videos that we talked about before. But I would spend a tremendous amount of time, 90% on problem training, 10% on product training. The product doesn't really matter on a cold call. The problem training does. So I'd flip it 90% on problem training, and I'd bring and I'd start with just one person, one job, not 10. You can't learn a whole guitar song. I think sometimes leaders throw too much at SDRs, like 9 personas. It's too overwhelming. Sort of like about what Snowflake is doing. They're starting with like these people with this issue, so you can get to know it a little bit. I don't know, Jen, if you have a take on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's an awesome take. I would add win-loss. Like when you win, don't just tell the story of why they bought. Like we have a channel that talks about anytime we book a deal, like what was the circumstance. Really hold the team accountable for talking about to Josh's point earlier, the before story. What was the before that elicited their positive response to what we had to offer them? Make sure you're calling that out in the announcements. Same thing for losses. When we lose, have a culture of learning from losing. We thought for these reasons, this would be a great prospect. We learned in the process. This is how the company was getting the job done. It was good enough. If you hear these things, be prepared. Watch out for it. Those are the two things I think leaders can do. If you are a seller and you are working in an organization where you are not getting this type of insight, one, that sucks. I feel you. Like it's hard. But two, this is again where we are like sitting on this embarrassment of riches now. There are so many conferences that are functional led, right? Like you can Google CIO conferences and hear CIOs talking about how they're overcoming problems and what they're doing. And just by spending the time there to learn the language of how they say what they say, the words that they use, like one of the things I learned early on is I was using all these buzzwords thinking I sounded smart. In reality, I couldn't sound more like a vendor because real humans in the chief sales officer role just don't talk like that. So there's benefit regardless if your organization does it or not, but speaking in the language that your customers use, I think is a really powerful way to start to peek that back.
Yeah, I mean, Charlotte Johnson over at Sales Loft, she did something amazing before she even started working there. Like she's brand new. She's never sold anything. She doesn't know anything about sales. She reaches out to VPs of sales and says, hey, I'm about to start this job at Sales Loft. I have nothing to say. I don't even know what I'm selling. I would love to just understand a little bit about your job and what you do. Would you throw me a bone? Would you help me out? And she had like a 70% take rate on that. You might think, well, no one would say yes to that. Well, some people will, but no one will if you don't ever ask. So before she started on day one, I think she had like 8 or 9 meetings booked because the prospect goes, well, what do you guys do? She goes, I don't even know, but if you want, I could set you up some time with an AE. So you're like asking for help. Also inbound calls. Someone's coming inbound. Hopefully the AE is saying some version of what's going on over there that caused you to want to talk to a salesperson today. Can't you just stay with like what's going on and listen to the events and circumstances? And again, lingo library it. Anything coming out of a customer's mouth is in that lingo library, and then you'll just lift that and you'll put it into your talk tracks and your email cadences.
I love lingo library. I love that. It's so good.
Lingo library.
One thing I'm loving is every time you guys are talking about how you're approaching this is you have a hypothesis started with that list. and you're just, every question is getting you closer to the truth. That's it.
That's it.
That's all it is. And in that, if somebody called me with that type of interaction, I would be willing to go and recommend them someone if it wasn't for me. Well, because it would be such a game changer. Because that is a buying experience that just doesn't exist unless Josh is training you, or the few people that like really take prospecting to that level. But it's really interesting because now you are really empowered as a rep to really own that list and then keep refining it. And you're really going to get better because now you're testing in live and you're editing. And now if you can just share that information with marketing, share that information with your sales leader, share that information with CS and have that back and forth, that's an unbelievable combo.
You know, the challenge is that salespeople are taught how to persuade, right? So Robert Cialdini, I'm trying to talk people into things. The problem is that's tough, right? Because if you're like in a mall and you're walking and a kiosk person says, "Can I ask you a question?" You're going to sort of know, but you're going to go into what I call the zone of resistance, which is a reflex reaction to sales pressure. So when you try to persuade people by saying the reason for my call is, and you start to pitch your value proposition, your prospects are going to go into the zone of resistance. It's a reflex reaction to pressure, and pressure is perceived as a threat. It triggers the fight or flight response. It's just biological. So what we have to do is not pitch. Let go of assumptions and ask a question to, as you put it, Nicholas, see if we can create an environment where people feel comfortable opening up and telling us the truth, because the biggest obstacle is your prospects are afraid of you. They're afraid of salespeople. They know what's coming. So to overcome that, we got to change our intent. We got to lean back, and we got to be a little casual and non-assumptive to lower the zone of resistance before we persuade. Persuasion, there's a room for it, but it's not the first step. The first step is I got to lower the resistance that people have around salespeople, especially on a cold call. Yeah. Humor is probably the best way to do it. You know, humor. If you can find, like, one of the best cold calls I ever made, I was calling into Geico, which we ended up getting, but that's not beside the point. I called the admin to Jess Reed, who was the guy I was trying to get a hold of, and I heard her eating when she picked up the phone, and she's in California. And I said, "Are you eating avocado toast? Doesn't everyone in California eat avocado toast? Does it have Himalayan sea salt on it?" She starts cracking up. She goes, "I am eating avocado toast," right? So if you hear a dog barking, is that a pit bull? Does it bite salespeople? Should I hang up? Like, any little thing that you can do to sort of like loosen that up a little bit. You know, Justin's thing with the plane, like how do you get on a boat to get loose? Now does that, you know, that's going to lower resistance, as well as not pitching and just asking questions that get prospects to scratch their head and go, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
We're back to mental models.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful thing.
It's just what I like that you're articulating, Josh. Oftentimes I find salespeople are unconscious intuitives, and there's like a way that you're bringing that conscious, basically you're bringing it into explicit steps, and here's what to do. So one last thing, is we're kind of nearing the end of our time here today, at least for me, and Nick, you're welcome to ask anything else. How can, like, what are the non-negotiables for a seller as they're prospecting? So we sort of covered like the targeting, we've covered the list building, we've covered some of the messaging framework, but is there anything else that's like a non-negotiable that we haven't talked about that sellers should be paying attention to when they're starting their outbound prospecting?
Jen, you want to kick us off there, then I'll add? Or I can start and you can pile on.
You go.
So here's one we haven't talked about that I think is probably the most important and probably the hardest. You know, sellers have targets, they have quota. They're incented to book meetings, they're incented to close deals. And because of that, they put pressure on prospects, right? They pitch and they persuade. And as we demonstrated, that actually has the opposite effect. So how do you start to train your mind to lean back and to be calm on a cold call, and to slow your pace down and to not be assumptive? The best way that I know how to do that is mindfulness training. So there's a guy by the name of Sam Harris. He has this wonderful app called Waking Up that I've been using quite a bit. And what this is going to do is it's just going to make you aware of your thoughts. when you're going to start to think to yourself, wow, my intent is I'm trying to talk someone into something. And in that moment where you're aware of your thoughts, you're going to be able to just sort of tone back. You're going to be able to, for example, pause after a prospect is done talking and not cut them off. And you can practice pausing in your personal life. When someone's done talking, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi before you open your mouth. That's a muscle that you've probably never worked on before, but is super important on a cold call. When a prospect talks, you just pause and you sort of talk slow. And mindfulness training to me is how your mind works. Nobody's doing. And don't we want to know that? Like our minds, we're using it every day. So I think it's a non-negotiable. I do. I think it should be taught in school. Not only good for selling, but also for personal, relationships at work and in your personal life as well.
I love that.
Yeah.
Definitely love that. That's something I need to be better about. I think the only other thing I might add is we talked a little bit about storytelling. We talked about understanding deep evidence that the problem might exist, right? Looking for cues like that. There's a term that Brian Adamson used that I really liked. Instead of storytelling, it's called story prompting. And essentially what he meant by it is when you can get the person on the other end of the phone, the prospect, the customers, to start telling you stories, you've kind of hooked into a two-way dialogue. So one of the things, once you start mastering stories, don't just land the story, stop and wait for the reaction. Figure out how do you turn the ending into a way to prompt them. So for example, one of the things I talk a lot about here at Challenger is losing to no decision. So 38% of deals on average are lost to no decision. So I would imagine when I'm looking at what you sell, I see you're selling an AI product to farmers. Gosh, that's got to be really hard to teach farmers about technology like that, right? Or what do you see? And get them to open up and talk to you because there's so much we can learn. Even on a cold call, I think we often feel rushed and hurried to just get off the call and get the meeting. But to Josh's point, if we set that aside and just look to have a conversation, story prompting can teach us a lot, which even if it might not be the right person, we can then take that story and tell it to others and learn from that and tell it.
So what I loved about what Jen said there is she also did something really good for the ego, right? So we never want to tell a prospect on a call that they have a problem or that they're wrong. So what Jen did really well there, and I had someone do this to me the other day and it worked perfectly. I said, Josh, as someone with 4 years of experience creating podcasts and producing this content, what's your take on a tool like Descript? Now that's going to elicit one of two answers. Either I know about it or I don't know about it. Either way is good. We can't assume that our prospects have never heard of this category. Like when we work with Captivate IQ, it's rather assumptive for us to think that the CFO doesn't know about automating commission payouts. So we're not going to assume that they don't. We're going to say, hey, how have you been dealing with this today? What's your take on automated commission payouts? When a rep asks that question, and I've heard these recordings from Captivate, what the prospect says is, oh, we've tried that a bunch of times. And it doesn't work because our payout structures are way too complex. And the rep, because he's trained in mindfulness, pauses for a second and simply says, I'm sorry, too complex? And the prospect opens up for 4 minutes. And the rep says, after that, if it would be okay, I'd like to send you a short video as to how our latest release addresses those things. If you think it's interesting, we could talk. If not, and you think it's complete garbage, that's okay too. Is that something you'd be open to? Sure, send it along. But the rep is never getting there if he's pitching Captivate IQ. He's assuming that the prospect knows about this and has even tried it. And to Jen's point, as someone with a long, successful career in RevOps, what's your take on automating commission payouts? Doesn't work for us. I'm sorry, it doesn't work? And maybe there's a valid reason why it doesn't work. And don't we want to know that instead of pitching? So I love what Jen said there. What'd you call it, Jen? What'd you call it? Story
prompting. Credit to Brian Adamson, did not come up with it.
Story prompting. You're sort of stroking the person's ego, and everyone loves giving their opinion, but they don't like it when you give your opinion. Prospects also like correcting you, but they don't like being corrected. So if I use a label and I say something wrong, sounds like your current commission payout structure is working perfectly. Well, I wouldn't say it's working perfectly. Oh yeah, what's going on? That's what they like to correct, but they don't like being corrected. So I love what Jen's point there, which is like, we don't want to tell anyone they're wrong. We don't want to pitch anything, and we don't want to assume that they don't know anything about what we're talking about.
Well, if that's not a mic drop moment to close out this B2B Power Hour, thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I love the chat and all the comments that are coming in through the entire show. Josh, Jen, thank you for your insights and your frameworks. And I got to go download Sam Harris's app. I have another mindfulness one, but I got to check out his. I know the power of that. And my favorite shows are shows like these where I walk away and I go, damn, I need to go re-listen to that like 3 times. So all these little nuggets and download them all. So thank you both for coming today and for joining the B2B Power Hour.
Thanks for inviting me. Jen, let's make it shorter time between chats next time.
I know. Thank you. I always learn from you.
Likewise. Take you guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.